Your doctor ran your blood sugar panel last year and told you everything looked fine. And maybe it did. But here is the problem with that. Blood glucose is a late stage signal. By the time it starts climbing on a standard panel, insulin has already been elevated for years, sometimes a decade. And chronically elevated insulin is what destroys your metabolism, your cardiovascular system, and your cognitive function in silence. I am Dr. Daniel Harr. I have spent 21 years treating metabolic dysfunction before it becomes diabetes. And what I see in my clinical practice consistently is this: the habits doing the most damage are not the obvious ones. They are the ones hiding inside what looks like a normal day. Today, I am going to walk you through 7 of them, ranked from important to absolutely critical. And I need to tell you right now that number 1 is something the vast majority of seniors are doing inside their own homes every single day of the year. It has nothing to do with food. And what the research now shows about its effect on fasting insulin is going to stop you cold. Stay with me because we are counting down from 7 to 1. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, has your doctor ever measured your fasting insulin? Not glucose, insulin. The answers I get to that question every week tell me everything about why this channel exists. Number 7. Sitting for long, unbroken stretches every day. I am not talking about your exercise routine. Many of you walk, you garden, you stay active, and that matters. But what happens in the hours between those activities is where insulin damage accumulates quietly. And the mechanism behind it is something your 15-minute appointment never covered. Skeletal muscle is the largest organ of insulin-mediated glucose disposal in the human body. Your muscles account for roughly 80% of the glucose your body clears after a meal. When you are sitting, your largest muscle groups are essentially offline. They are not contracting, they are not pulling glucose out of circulation. Your pancreas compensates by releasing more insulin to do the job your inactive muscles are refusing to do. Repeat that cycle across hours, every day, across years, and what you are training your body to do is produce more and more insulin to accomplish less and less. A systematic review and meta-analysis published in 2024, analyzing data across multiple trials, found that breaking prolonged sitting every 30 minutes was the single most effective intervention for improving both blood glucose and insulin response compared to unbroken sitting. Not longer exercise sessions, not intensity, frequency of interruption. And here is what compounds the problem after 60. Sarcopenia, the age-related loss of muscle mass, is already reducing your glucose disposal capacity. You have less metabolic machinery to clear insulin. So every hour of unbroken sitting is hitting a body with a smaller target. The physiological hit is proportionally greater than it was at 45. Here is what I tell my patients. Set a timer for 30 minutes. When it goes off, stand up and walk for 2 to 3 minutes. Walk to the kitchen. Step outside. Do 5 slow standing calf raises. The movement does not need to be intense. It needs to be consistent because the mechanism does not care about effort. It cares about contraction frequency. And what that same muscle tissue does to your insulin while you sleep, which is item 6, is something most people never connect. Number 6, sleeping fewer than 6 hours or sleeping with chronic interruptions. Sleep deprivation is one of the most well-documented drivers of insulin resistance in the clinical literature, and it is also one of the most ignored in conversations about metabolic health. Your doctor is not asking you about your sleep quality when they review your HOMA-IR. But the research says they should be. A study analyzing the effect of restricted sleep on 294 patients found that those with poor sleep quality showed significantly higher fasting insulin, higher HOMA-IR scores, and lower beta cell function compared to those sleeping adequately. The mechanisms are multiple, and they compound each other. First, sleep deprivation elevates cortisol, and cortisol is a counter-regulatory hormone. Its job, biologically, is to raise blood sugar and oppose insulin. The more cortisol circulating, the harder your insulin has to work. Second, fragmented sleep suppresses deep slow-wave sleep, the stage where cellular insulin signaling is most efficiently reset. When you skip that stage night after night, Your cells wake up the next morning already less sensitive than they were the night before. A 2022 meta analysis published in Sleep Medicine Reviews found that sleep restriction and circadian misalignment both negatively affected insulin sensitivity in controlled settings. The effect was measurable, it was consistent, and it showed up in the HOMA-IR data. I had a patient, let us call him Richard, 68 years old, pre diabetic fasting glucose, elevated fasting insulin. He was exercising 4 days a week. His diet was reasonably clean. What we had never discussed was his sleep. He was averaging 5 hours a night and waking 2 to 3 times from back discomfort. We addressed the sleep architecture first: a supportive mattress, a strict sleep window, and no screens after 9 p.m. His fasting insulin dropped measurably within 8 weeks without changing a single thing about his diet. That is how much leverage sleep has over this system. 7 hours minimum. Darkness. No screens for the hour before bed. If you are waking frequently, talk to your physician about whether sleep-disordered breathing is a factor, because obstructive sleep apnea alone in older adults carries a significantly elevated risk of insulin resistance that remains undetected for years. Number 5. Starting the day with refined carbohydrates. This one is deeply embedded in an entire generation's understanding of a healthy breakfast. Oatmeal, toast, orange juice, low-fat granola. These are the foods you were told to eat, and I understand why. But what they actually do to your insulin in the morning is the opposite of what your body needs, and the mechanism is one that becomes more consequential every year after 60. In the morning, cortisol is naturally at its daily peak. That is by design. Cortisol raises blood sugar to fuel the day. It is a normal physiological process. But here is where the problem starts. When you add a high carbohydrate meal on top of an already elevated cortisol level, you create a compounding insulin spike. Blood sugar climbs fast. Insulin surges to bring it down. And because after 60 your insulin signaling is already less efficient, the overcorrection is larger than it used to be. You crash. You reach for more carbohydrates. And you have set the hormonal tone for the entire day from the first meal. A randomized clinical trial published in Diabetes Care found that skipping breakfast or shifting the timing and composition of the first meal significantly altered postprandial insulin response through the rest of the day, with effects persisting into dinner. The first meal you eat is not just a meal, it is a metabolic signal that cascades forward for hours. I know exactly what some of you are thinking right now, because I see this comment every week. Dr. Harr, I have been eating oatmeal for breakfast my entire life, and my doctor says I am fine. Here is my answer. Your doctor is checking your glucose. Oatmeal does not dramatically move fasting glucose in the short term. What it moves is insulin, and that is the number nobody is measuring. 2 eggs with your oatmeal changes the hormonal response dramatically. Protein slows gastric emptying, reduces the rate of glucose absorption, and blunts the insulin spike. You do not need to overhaul your breakfast overnight. You need to give it something to slow it down. Number 4. Ignoring chronic low-grade stress as a metabolic variable. Most seniors do not connect the tension they carry, the worry about family, the financial uncertainty, the physical discomfort, to what is happening with their insulin. But cortisol does not distinguish between the stress of a predator and the stress of a difficult phone call. The physiological response is the same. And when that response is chronic, the metabolic consequences are measurable. Cortisol directly antagonizes insulin. It is its biological counterpart. When cortisol is chronically elevated, it tells your liver to release stored glucose, even when you have not eaten. Your pancreas responds by producing more insulin to manage the blood sugar that cortisol just artificially raised. You are running a hormonal tug-of-war 24 hours a day, and insulin is always losing ground. Research published in Diabetology and Metabolic Syndrome found a significant positive association between urinary cortisol levels and HOMA-IR in non-diabetic subjects exposed to chronic psychological stressors. Cortisol was the only variable independently associated with insulin resistance after adjusting for metabolic syndrome components. Not diet, not activity level, cortisol. Let me give you an illustrative scenario. Let us call him Gerald, 67 years old, retired engineer. He came to me with a fasting insulin of 16 and a HOMA-IR that placed him firmly in the pre-diabetic metabolic range. His diet was clean. He exercised regularly. When I reviewed his life in detail, what stood out was a prolonged family legal dispute that had been running for 2 years. Constant, unresolved, low-grade psychological stress. We addressed it not as a wellness issue, but as a metabolic variable. A daily 20-minute walk outside, a structured breathing protocol before sleep, and deliberate reduction of the 2 daily phone calls that reliably elevated his tension. 8 weeks later, his fasting insulin had dropped to 11. He had changed nothing about his food or his exercise. The only variable was cortisol. Here is what I want this channel to do that most metabolic medicine channels do not. I want you to recognize that your stress is not a character flaw you need to manage better. It is a metabolic input your pancreas is responding to every single hour of every day. And interventions that lower cortisol, whether that is a 15-minute walk outside, a daily breathing protocol, consistent social connection, or simply addressing a source of ongoing conflict in your life, are not wellness extras. They are insulin interventions. If you have found this information useful, take a moment right now to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. I publish new research-backed content every week, specifically for adults over 60 who want to understand the mechanism, not just the headline. That subscription is what allows us to keep this channel going. Now, moving on to number 3, and this is the one that surprises people most in my practice. Number 3, drinking your sugar instead of eating it. I am not talking about soda. Most people my patient's age gave that up long ago. I am talking about orange juice, apple juice, smoothies made from fruit. The beverages sitting on the healthy side of your refrigerator that are doing nearly the same insulin damage as the ones you already avoided. Here is the mechanism, and it is simple once you understand it. When you eat whole fruit, the fiber matrix slows the release of fructose and glucose into circulation. Absorption is gradual. The insulin response is proportionally manageable. When you drink juice, that fiber is gone. What remains is liquid sugar that reaches your small intestine in minutes. The absorption spike is steep. The insulin response is rapid and high. And liquid calories bypass the satiety signals that solid food triggers, which means you drink them without the hormonal feedback that would tell you to stop. The Framingham Offspring Study, analyzing data from over 2,500 participants, found that higher consumption of sugar-sweetened beverages was significantly associated with elevated fasting insulin levels, an independent marker of insulin resistance, even when other dietary variables were accounted for. After 60, the processing speed of your pancreatic beta cells is slower. The clearance rate of insulin from circulation is reduced. So the same liquid sugar load that a 35-year-old might metabolize within a few hours can keep your insulin elevated for significantly longer. That sustained elevation is what damages your arterial walls, your brain vasculature, and your liver over time. Replace juice with the whole fruit it came from, not because of the calories, because of the fiber. The fiber is the mechanism. It is the difference between a manageable insulin response and a metabolic spike your body was not designed to handle at this age. Number 2, losing muscle and doing nothing about it. After 60, you lose approximately 1 to 2% of your skeletal muscle mass per year if you are not actively opposing that loss, and most people are not. The consequence for insulin goes far deeper than just physical strength. Skeletal muscle is the primary site of insulin-mediated glucose uptake in the human body. It accounts for 70 to 80% of the glucose cleared from your bloodstream after a meal. When you lose muscle, you lose metabolic capacity. There is less tissue available to respond to insulin. So your pancreas compensates by producing more insulin to process the same amount of glucose. A smaller target requires more effort. Over time, that effort becomes chronic overproduction. And that is the definition of insulin resistance in practice. Your system demanding more and more insulin to accomplish what a healthy amount used to handle easily. Research published in Diabetology and Metabolic Syndrome reviewed the bidirectional relationship between sarcopenia and insulin resistance, and the findings are unambiguous. The two conditions accelerate each other. Insulin resistance promotes muscle loss. Muscle loss worsens insulin resistance. And after 60, both processes are already in motion by default if you are not actively intervening. Here is the mechanism your doctor rarely has time to explain. Resistance exercise, lifting weights, using resistance bands, body weight movements like push-ups and squats, increases the expression and translocation of GLUT4 transporters to your muscle cell membranes. GLUT4 is the protein that opens the door to let glucose into the cell. More GLUT4 means more insulin sensitivity. It is a direct cellular mechanism, not a general fitness effect. 2 sessions per week of resistance training is what the research consistently supports as the minimum effective dose for preserving insulin sensitivity in adults over 60. It does not need to be heavy. It needs to be consistent. And it needs to start before the muscle loss becomes the problem, because restoring lost muscle is significantly harder than preserving what you have. And now, number 1, the daily habit that nearly every senior practices inside their own home all year round, that the research now shows is quietly suppressing your metabolic rate and keeping your fasting insulin elevated. And it has nothing to do with what you are eating. That habit is keeping your home at 72 to 76 degrees Fahrenheit around the clock, every day of the year. Here is the mechanism, and it is one of the most underappreciated findings in metabolic science in the last decade. Your body contains a specialized tissue called brown adipose tissue, brown fat. Unlike white fat, which stores energy, brown fat burns energy to generate heat. And brown fat does not just regulate temperature. It plays a direct, measurable role in insulin sensitivity and blood sugar clearance. Brown fat contains high concentrations of glucose transporters. When it is activated, it pulls glucose directly out of circulation, independently of the standard insulin signaling pathway. A study published in the journal Diabetes, conducted at the National Institutes of Health, found that adults who spent 2 hours daily in mild cold environments of approximately 66 to 68 degrees over a 6-week period showed a 42% increase in brown fat metabolic activity, along with measurable improvements in insulin sensitivity and reductions in fasting blood glucose. These effects were more pronounced in older adults, whose brown fat reserves are lower but remain responsive to temperature stimulus. When you keep your home at a constant 74 degrees year-round, you remove the only thermal stimulus that activates brown fat. The tissue becomes dormant. You lose one of the few insulin-independent glucose clearance mechanisms your body has available. And the research suggests this matters more after 60, not less, because your conventional insulin signaling efficiency has already declined. I want to tell you about a patient I will call Thomas, 71 years old. He came to me with a fasting insulin of 18, a HOMA-IR in the pre-diabetic range, fatigue, and 14 pounds of abdominal weight gain over 3 years, despite what he described as a reasonable diet. We reviewed his daily routine carefully. He exercised moderately, he slept adequately, he was not eating badly, but his home thermostat had not moved below 74 degrees in years. We made one change. He lowered it to 68 during the day and wore a light sweater when he felt cool. After 8 weeks, his fasting insulin had dropped from 18 to 11. His morning energy was noticeably improved. His abdominal circumference had reduced by an inch without dietary changes. He called my office and said, "Dr. Harr, I cannot believe that was the variable I was missing." Lower your thermostat to 66 to 68 degrees during the day. If that feels uncomfortable, wear a layer. Give your brown fat the stimulus it needs to work. It costs nothing. It requires no prescription, and the mechanism behind it is some of the most compelling metabolic data I have seen in 21 years of clinical practice. Here is what I want you to take from today. Your doctor checked your glucose. That is a start. But glucose is a late-stage signal. What is happening upstream? In your fasting insulin, your HOMA-IR, your brown fat activity, your muscle glucose transporter density, is where the real story of your metabolic health is being written right now. And every single item on today's list acts on that upstream system, not on the surface number your annual panel captures. 7 habits. None of them require a prescription, none of them require a specialist referral. Every one of them can begin this week. Your insulin is not a fixed variable. It is a response to the signals your daily life is sending. Change the signals, and you will be surprised by how quickly this system responds. If you want to understand what fasting insulin actually measures, what a healthy HOMA-IR looks like, and exactly what to ask your doctor to order at your next appointment, I made a video specifically on that. It is called Your Doctor is Checking the Wrong Number: What Fasting Insulin Actually Tells You. That is your next step. I will see you there.